Good afternoon. I'm Drew Spaniel, the founder and director of research for Mission Critical, a nonprofit organization that facilitates collaboration between academia, industry, and government to develop and disseminate interdisciplinary, peer-reviewed, technical and non-technical research that is focused on improving critical infrastructure security and resilience. Today, on our Critical Insights series, we are joined by my great friend, the exceptional Itzik Kotler. Itzik Kotler is a former member of the elite Israel 8200 intelligence unit. He has served as the CTO of Security Art and led SOC activities and research for Radware. He is a well-known security researcher and a frequent speaker at security conferences and events. Itzik is the Chief Technology Officer and co-founder of SafeBreach. SafeBreach is an organization that redefines how organizations manage defenses and control cyber risk through solutions that combine the mindset of a CISO with the toolset of a hacker. In 2014, SafeBreach launched the industry's first continuous security validation platform. Their award-winning BAS solution enables modern enterprises to continuously and safely execute attacks, validate and optimize the efficacy of their security controls, and prioritize remediation efforts to mitigate the most critical gaps before a breach occurs. Welcome, Itzik, and if you don't mind me saying, I could not think of a more experienced expert to discuss adversarial simulation with today.
Thank you, Drew. Thank you for having me.
Jumping into our discussion, as a level setter for maybe our non-technical audience members, how would you explain adversarial simulation and maybe its importance for sort of across different stakeholder audiences, technical, non-technical, across different critical infrastructure silos?
Of course, it's a great question, and definitely one that people should be aware of when they hear the term adversarial simulation and the usage of it. So in today's atmospheres, companies have spending millions of dollars on different security controls. This has been a traditional approach to security. By buying different security controls, the risk can be controlled and mitigated. However, with the nature of the dynamic environments that we have today, whether it's cloud or expansion of infrastructure, it's not always clear the efficiency of these security controls. What used to be a policy that could be governed across the entire company sometimes needs to change or exclude the different personas. And so there's a complexity in managing those different security controls, which are often in silo. Adversarial simulation is a way to validate the security control, not by looking at best practices or by overlooking the configuration, but rather by looking at it from the adversarial perspective. Companies have bad security controls in order to not to get hacked in a certain manners. By trying to simulate those manners and understand if they will be detected and prevented, that's exactly the value. In other realms, if you want to simply put, we can think of it as someone who replaces the roof because there was a leakage, so there is a new roof. And so traditionally, they would wait for the winter to see if the new roof is holding. However, they don't really have to wait for the winter. They can put water right now on the roof to see if there's a leakage. And that's exactly the power of adversarial simulation. You don't have to wait for the adversary. You can simulate ahead of the time and know exactly how your security control would respond.
I think that's a great metaphor because maybe the worst time to find out that the leaky roof, the fix didn't work and the roof is still leaking would be, in the winter, in the moment that it happens. Similarly, with an attack, to make the metaphor literal, the worst time to find out your controls aren't working is after you've been breached.
Yeah.
Without going too deep into the weeds or waxing philosophical, how much does thinking like an adversary or behaving like the bad guy elevate adversarial simulation over more traditional or arguably more archaic preventative strategies, like just pen testing on its own, or just preventative security controls according to best practices?
Sure. So it's a great question. I will answer both pillars. I'll start with how does breach and attack simulation is positioned against traditional pen testing. I think over here, the clear winner is the ability to leverage software and be continuous. So yeah, you can hire people to do a pen test. It will be a point in time they would come in, they would make the assessment, and then they would go. but then there's always going to be the day after. So they gave you the PDF on a Monday. Is this the same situation on a Tuesday? Is nothing really changed? Then what happens a week later? Is that pen test report is still the right priorities and targets? Again, as we understand that there is a multiple contributors and factors from risk, anything from work from home, VPN, elastic infrastructure such as cloud, things are changing dynamically as the business demands for it or requires it. Having a point-in-time assessment is just not enough. So while pen tests can augment BAS in certain areas and definitely can add the human element and the human creativity, what BAS allows more than anything is a consistent and systematical approach to measuring your risk. Running the software day in, day out, you can get trends as in manner of minutes, and then have those detailed day after day, hour by hour. Now, when you look on the preventative side, obviously, this type of a solution is best applied once you get the preventative controls in place. There is absolutely no sense in running such technology if you have no way of detecting or mitigating the threats. However, many times customers and prospects would be doubling down on certain threats or on certain risks, believing that they might need multiple solutions in an attack vector. This is where breach and attack simulation technologies can help clarify what is the risk or what is the level of threat actor that can actually bypass or breach the company. And again, the benefit is, of course, a more holistic and balanced risk management. You might be thinking you need 2 endpoint solutions or 2 endpoint type of security controls, but then you can neglect something like an email or another front. And again, this is because of different biases and marketing and just the environment that we live in. By using an adversarial perspective, by disconnecting from the technology and just looking at it like the adversary would have looked at that, then you can basically refresh some of those biases and look holistically on how you should be going in purchasing and deploying different security controls.
I think I definitely couldn't put that better myself. Maybe piggybacking off of the dynamic versus static, the snapshot comment you had there. There's this assumption that attribution itself is adversarial simulation is dependent on these like static snapshots of adversaries, which is often referred to for our audience as attribution. And that's a very post-incident response. How much of adversarial simulation is actually informed by the established attack patterns, and what is the capacity, of SafeBreach's solutions or just solutions in general for actually identifying and mitigating novel attack vectors where the adversary is dynamic or has evolved?
I think it's a great question, and it's definitely a great topic to kind of highlight the differences between looking at from an adversarial perspective and attribution, as you mentioned, which is part of the realm of threat intelligence and to some degree incident response and other type of processes. So it's important to understand that if you look at an adversarial as a group, whether they originate from a certain country or have a certain ideology, this is a metadata to the actual tools, techniques, and procedures that would take place on a particular endpoint or network. When you think about attacks like brute force or pass the hash, these are generic technological approaches to how adversaries have used and also in the future will use in order to get their end game. Now, there is a good need to disconnect them because testing yourself against the technological attack vectors, different ransomwares, different tools, different persistency. And by the way, one great framework that has been putting it into the front is the MITRE ATT&CK, for instance, which does take the holistic approach to how an attack looks like and break it down to the different pillars and looking at all the pillars from a technological perspective. They also have their attribution at the end of the day, but the framework itself is addressing the technological and the actionable steps. This is the right approach to use this technology. Again, there has never been a way to quote unquote commit a threat actor to specific TTPs. Threat actors can change TTPs, they can evolve, as you said, they can learn from past incidents or past mistakes and create new tools. Matter of fact, we have seen this. We have seen this evolution. It doesn't mean that past knowledge is not valid. Actually, past knowledge is in many times being reused by either lesser sophisticated adversaries or in some cases even the same adversaries, as long as they have not been caught and the TTPs and IOCs were not made public. So breach and attack simulation takes its source of truth from running those attacks, the technological steps, just like the adversary would have done. The extra layer of metadata, which is which APT or which threat actor has been observed using those methods, is just another metadata layer to help you prioritize or makes it a little bit more relevant for your industry or vertical. But by no means you should be ignoring it. If the truth is that you can be hacked by ransomware X, regardless if your industry is being targeted by those individuals, this is a truth that you should be looking at and risk that you should be thinking about mitigating. Because tomorrow that group might be targeting your vertical. And by knowing today that you're vulnerable to ransomware X or technique Y, you can use this leverage of the time to fix it.
Absolutely. I think that that's kind of its own course in a nutshell. With regards to adversaries, as you mentioned, they are very adaptive, maybe, or they like to evolve. They also, sometimes go back to old attack vectors when they think there's, they can apply something new, or they can just get away with it. But obviously, they're also they're forward looking, and to a certain extent, incident response is a very asymmetric form of warfare, where it's harder to defend against than it is to launch an attack. So they can try things and they can experiment with new technologies. How much do you anticipate adversaries are currently or will eventually incorporate, artificial intelligence, generative AI, or even just basic machine learning into their attacks? And in what ways can simulation exercises help to proactively mitigate those emerging attacks?
It's a great topic and definitely one that perhaps in the future we can dive into a complete series just about that. I think that, as you said to yourself, every new technology can be used and abused at the same time, and AI is no different. AI has unlocked some enablers, business enablers for code development and other tasks today that can be automated. And so adversaries or the economies of attacks, either it's for profit like financial crimes or for nations, they also have tasks, they also have R&D, and they can use the same technology for their benefit. There's already evidence of different, I would say, LLMs that have been adopted or used for malicious purposes. And the goal here is ranging from a more sophisticated phishing emails, one that would be written in a more personalized manner, that would be infused with the news to make sure that they're more relevant, all the way to polymorphism, having an adversary using LLMs to rewrite the code on the fly and to use that as kind of like an evasion technique that would make sure their code is fresh, and to some degree also their behavior will be a little bit different every time, so it won't trigger what has already been seen in the past. But just like we described here, the two ends of the spectrum, the same underlying technology of adversarial simulation can tap exactly into those areas. So just to reiterate, if we're talking about a better phishing or a better way to try to use email as an infiltration vector, then just like the adversaries can tap into that knowledge or to those APIs, a breach and attack simulation system can do the same. Now, of course, at the end game, this will challenge the security control. So the broader question is, are the in the middle security controls would rise to the challenge? But both the real adversaries as well as the adversarial solutions, they both, as a fair play, can tap into those technologies. and not just for the email as an example, but also going back to the other spectrum of polymorphism, just like adversaries can use those LLM models to create their code fresh. The same simulation can then tap into AI to make sure their simulation is fresh. So it's equally, both sides can and possibly will be using it. Again, we already have evidence that adversaries are trying to abuse LLMs for their own benefits. So it's not a question of the whether they're going to do it, they're already doing it. The degree is how successful they are. And of course, this will be determined by the actual security controls and preventive mechanisms. Can they rise to the challenge of ever-changing threat landscape and sophistication as AI will be introducing?
Absolutely. And I think you bring up a good point of, especially with AI sort of on both on the horizon and sort of here now, but as a new sort of nascent technology. It is sort of both sides can use it in different ways. So maybe as a final question to wrap up, and I definitely think, as you mentioned, we have grounds for a future discussion here. Um, what do you think? I guess adversaries are sort of the traditional asymmetry is that adversaries, you know, uh, are a little more dynamic and a little more adaptive just because they are less predictable. They're working in the shadows to an extent, and they're unfettered or less restricted. They're limited only by their sophistication and your vulnerabilities. Whereas you are a sitting target, with your security controls in place. So when we look at sort of the arms race to use AI offensively or defensively, what barriers currently inhibit the defensive side, and what can be done to catalyze development or adoption of proactive AI driven solutions that will keep that AI race at least level, if not maybe even push it ahead or make it more preventative?
So I have a somewhat of an unpopular opinion or answer here. I actually think that while there is no doubt that AI on the defensive side will be a game changer, and we can talk in a few minutes about some of the areas that I personally think it would be helpful for the defenders using the large computation and the narrowing down of some of the complexity. But I honestly think that one of the biggest myths for the defenders is that, and as you very eloquently put, they allow themselves to be surprised by the adversary, and whether it's the asymmetrical nature of working in the shadows and having multiple attempts while the defenders needs to hit every ball, the adversaries are free to throw as much balls as they would like. If you think about it, when a hacker hacks a company, when an adversary breached a company, they're coming to an unknown playground. If it's a well-designed playground with different traps, with different cameras or different monitoring solutions, their chances of succeeding can be very small, almost impossible. Again, the further you can define, the further you can understand your business and the needs and narrow down the playground, the chances of the adversary to trip, to do something, to make a mistake, and then basically bring all your security defense on them is very big. Unfortunately, there is a large complexity and many issues that, again, I suspect AI would help. Again, just breaking down and making it more streamlined for us, the defenders, to better understand this playground that call our company, our production, our networks and systems. But it's not always necessary for an introduction of a new security tool or solution to stop the problem. Sometimes it's understanding the lay of the land and just remembering that the hacker comes to our playground, it comes to our network, and we can make it as hard as we want for them, and we can put as many things, including deceptions and diversions. And there is a lot of variety of technologies that we can waste their time, or we can send them chasing stuff that doesn't even work or dare, all the way to, of course, just stop them on their tracks and exposing their IOCs and TTPs at will. But it all begins with understanding the threats, the risks, the path, the business, what should be there and what should not be there. Now, of course, again, companies have their own complexity, and in today's ever-changing landscape of technology, that's not always a mission that can be carried by individuals or peoples. There is no doubt that by connecting the AI, connecting to a number of systems and doing the calculations and helping narrow down anomalies, all of it could be very simple to implement tomorrow. But it's my personal belief that once this type of order or these types of clarity would come to organizations, it would be the asymmetrical change that now the adversary will have to think twice before running a command on a workstation, not knowing if that would be the kind of game over command that would expose the whole campaign and perhaps burn months of efforts in just putting the wrong command on the wrong servers, just trying something, not knowing that thing is what blow their cover.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, that's a great response. And I think that's a great way to wrap up today's interview. I think we definitely have grounds for a follow-up in this Critical Insight series to discuss this in greater depth, both in terms of the coverage of the topic, but also in, terms of the technical details and the specificity for future discussions. Thank you very much for joining us, Isaac, and thank you to our audience for tuning in.
Thank you.
Thanks.